This is Canon's EOS 60D. It was introduced in October of 2010, which makes it about 13 years old. In this video I want to talk about how good this camera performs in 2023 and why you don't always need the newest gear, and something like this might be just right for you. At the heart of the fiberglass reinforced plastic body with an aluminum skeleton underneath sits an 18 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor. The sensor is shared with the 550D, the 600D, the 650D and the 7D, which were also pretty popular cameras around the time the 60D came out. In my opinion, 18 megapixels is still enough. There are many high-resolution cameras with like 60 or 100 megapixels, but you don't really need that for normal photography use. Cameras like the EOS R3 or the R6, R6 Mark II or even Sony's A7 Mark III use 24 megapixel sensors, and 24 megapixel isn't that much more than 18. The 18 megapixel sensor of the 60D was also used in some cheap consumer cameras like the 1200, 1300 or 4000D. In 2013, the 60D was succeeded by the 70D, which used a new 20 megapixel sensor and introduced the dual pixel AF system. Thanks to its new sensor and the Digic 4 processor inside, the 60D was the first camera of the dual-digit prosumer lineup that introduced video recording. It is able to record 1080p up to 30 frames and 720p up to 60 frames for some slow motion. The 600 and 700D, who feature the same sensor, also feature these video capabilities, which made these three cameras pretty popular amongst YouTubers who wanted to get more professional looking video at that time. Only downside, there is no continuous autofocus while recording video, so this probably won't be your new vlogging camera, even though you could actually use it for that if you set the focus at a fixed distance. In a more controlled environment you can get really cinematic video out of this camera, which you can easily mix and match even with more modern hardware. Some people even shoot entire films on this camera. You should definitely check out D4 Darius's channel, I'll link it below. He shot some amazing short films on the 60D and he's explaining a lot of stuff about it. For run and gun shooting you could easily attach a follow focus to the lens, or you can control the focus via USB through the camera, which is pretty handy actually. You could also set the focus at a fixed distance and try to keep the distance to the subject the same, so it will stay in focus. If the 3-inch fully articulating screen on the back of the camera isn't enough for focusing, you could also use the mini HDMI port on the side to attach an external monitor. Next to the HDMI port is also a microphone input, a USB port and a remote trigger input. If you attach a monitor via HDMI, you will only get the feed from the back LCD in the same resolution with all the overlays, but it's still bigger, so yeah. Now we come to one of the 60D's flaws, which as mentioned before is the autofocus. Looking through the viewfinder you get 9 cross-type AF sensors, with the middle one being the most precise. The autofocus isn't really that fast, but it works, for photos at least. When you flip the mirror up in live view mode or also in video mode, you only get contrast-based AF. And in video mode you don't get continuous AF. The speed and accuracy of the autofocus also really depends on the lens you use, but this camera probably won't be your new wildlife or sports camera. But with a good lens you could absolutely use the autofocus for portraits or some environmental stuff. Well, as long as you look through the viewfinder and don't use the contrast-based AF. We already talked about the ports and the screen, so let's talk about the rest of the camera body. Next to the screen is this amazing feeling Clicky wheel. On top we got a lockable mode dial with the integrated power switch, a hot shoe and this convenient second screen which shows you important information while shooting. Oh, and there's a pop-up flash which you should never use. On the right of the body we find an SDXC card reader, which has no problem with high capacity cards. On the bottom we find a 1/4-inch tripod mount obviously, and next to that the battery door which holds the LPE6 battery, which is still used in the modern R cameras and was also used in like the 5D, 6D, the professional cameras. The 60D has a photo burst rate of 5.3 images per second, which is slow compared to modern cameras, but it is okay. The shutter speed goes up to 1/8,000th of a second, which is good for using fast lenses in bright light. The photos from this 13-year-old camera still look amazing. I personally love Canon's color science. When shooting in good lighting conditions with a decent lens, you can get some shots that are indistinguishable from modern cameras. Look at these two landscape images for example. Could you tell me which of these was taken with the 60D and which one was taken with the A7 Mark III? Well, me neither, without pixel peeping at least. And that's the whole point. If you didn't know a photo was taken with a camera this old, you would probably never notice. On the internet, every image gets compressed to hell, so there is really no point of having extremely high megapixels except for cropping or for printing large photos. On the topic of prints, there's an interesting video from YouTuber Chris Howe who compared a 12 megapixel image to a 100 megapixel image printed out to the same size, and they couldn't really tell the difference. So even though you may want the newest camera with the best tech, the best autofocus, the highest resolution, if you aren't a working professional, you probably don't need it. Let's talk about something where the 60D really shows its age, and that is when there is less light. The ISO ranges from 100 to 6400 and is expandable up to 12,800, which you should never do as 6400 is already pretty grainy. Here you can really see the camera's age as the image starts falling apart really fast when you increase the ISO. So what you want to do is keep the ISO as low as possible, use a fast aperture lens, have good lighting, and try not to use this camera for nighttime photography except you're bringing a tripod to do longer exposure times. Lenses are really key for good images. If you are on a budget, you should never spend your whole budget on a camera and get the cheapest lens you can get with the rest of the money you have. You will be disappointed with the images you get. What you should rather do is get a cheap camera and get the best lens you can afford. With that combination, you will get the best possible images. One of my all-time favorite lenses has to be the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. The zoom range isn't that far, but you're getting f1.8 all the way through, and the sharpness of this lens is amazing. Only problem is, even used, it is still pretty expensive. If you want something that's a bit cheaper, you could get the 30mm f1.4. It's a great lens, really sharp, open aperture, and it is pretty affordable. What I would advise you not to get is one of these mega zoom lenses. This one is 18 to 200mm, which is an amazing zoom range, but the optical quality is pretty bad. The images look mushy and the aperture is 3.5 to 6.3. So with a camera like the 60D, which has already problems with low light, you're giving it even less light. This doesn't mean you can't get good images with a zoom lens like this, but you're making it hard for yourself. You're gonna have way more fun and be way more motivated to keep pushing into photography if you use a fast aperture zoom lens or a prime lens. A really handy tool for Canon cameras like the 60D is Magic Lantern. It is an aftermarket firmware that introduces a whole lot of new options and a new menu to the camera. For the 60D you get way better manual audio control, you get a rack focusing option that actually uses the AF of the camera. You get an intervalometer for photos, you get to choose the bitrate manually for video, which is also pretty good, and you get a new handy overlay for the LCD of the camera. There obviously are way more functions in Magic Lantern, and they also vary a little bit from camera to camera. So if you have an older Canon DSLR or you are getting one, you should really look into getting Magic Lantern installed on your camera. If you are relatively new to photography and want to get your first camera, you are on a tight budget, or maybe you want to get a cheap B camera, an older DSLR like the 60D is a great option and you should definitely look into that. There is a wide variety of used lenses and used cameras available for relatively cheap prices, and as I already mentioned, you should always get the best lens you can afford and not the most expensive camera you can afford. Except you can afford both, then get both. What you should really do is learn how to compose and learn how to control the camera settings. At the end of the day, a camera is just a tool like every other tool, and if you know how to use it, the results will be great. Big thanks to my buddy Kane for helping me out filming some B-roll and also letting me take some photos of him. You should definitely check out his channel. He does videos on smartphone filmmaking and gaming stuff. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you got any questions or comments, just leave them below in the comment section.